Well, hello everybody, wherever you are, and welcome to session number 4, getting the very best out of people. I hope you've had good opportunity to work on your homework. Obviously what happens between these sessions is critically important to your success. What we're trying to do here is to develop a process where we're giving you a couple of practical tools, and the idea is to go out and try these tools in between sessions, and that's how it really makes a big difference. I've had some great feedback from people, and I really appreciate that about the series. So that's good to know that we're on the right track. So let's get underway and look at this topic about getting the very best out of people. It's an elusive topic. We've all worked with people who perhaps are less motivated than we'd like, and we've all struggled with how to get the best out of them. We've also worked, of course, with people, hopefully, who are extremely intrinsically motivated. In other words, they have an internal motivation, and as a leader, you don't have to do very much at all. You really just have to put them, steer them in the right direction, and off they go. And most people, of course, fall in between. So we'll talk about all that in terms of the process. Okay, so let's have a look at what we're going to be covering. I guess the first point I want to make is that I'll just turn this off. And I guess the first point I want to make about all of this is that I challenge you to think about it this way, that your particular role as a leader is really about getting the very best from each team member of each member of your team. Now, when I say the very best, that might not be 100%. It might, in fact, be 5% or 10% additional discretionary effort. So just imagine if you've got a team of 5 people and you have created a motivational environment by which they become motivated, and each of those 5 people have increased their level of productivity by 10%. Although it doesn't look much, overall that's a serious improvement in team productivity. So that's the way I'd like you to look at it. It may not be about getting 100% out of everybody all the time. It never is, and it's unrealistic to think that way. I mean, we as leaders don't always operate at 100%, so why would we expect others to do the same? But there are some strategies and things that you can do to create the motivational environment and the environment by which people can prosper. So I'd leave you with that thought before we move into some of the strategies and models, and just say to you that really, at the end of the day, that has to be your number one success factor, if you like. So what are we covering this morning or today? I'm going to cover 4 broad areas, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the myths around motivation, because I think there's a lot of nonsense that's written about motivation, and I just want to debunk some of that nonsense and give people some clarity around what motivation really is and what you as a leader can do in this whole equation. The reality is actually that you can't motivate anybody to do anything. I don't know if you've ever considered that, but it's true. All you can do is create the right motivational environment, and then it's the choice of the person or persons to make up their mind whether they want to be motivated. That's their choice, not yours. Then I want to talk a little bit about what people want out of their work, and there's a bit of research that I want to share with you where employees were actually surveyed, 9,000 employees across a number of different cultures and across 20 odd industries were asked what they wanted to get from their job, what were the most important attributes. And I want to share that with you because obviously if we know collectively what people want out of their work, then our job as a leader is to try to create that environment if we can. And if we can do that, then we're creating that motivational environment that I was talking about before, which may allow that person to come to work with a little bit more motivation. I then want to talk about job and non-job tasks, which might seem like a fairly strange topic, but obviously job tasks are related to the job description. And these are the technical things that people are expected to do day to day and pretty much written down in their job description. But the non-job tasks are the areas that I think creates the greatest problem for many of us. These are the tasks, or these are the things that people do that aren't actually written in the job description, but nevertheless, if performed well, make a huge impact on performance, and if not performed well, have a huge negative impact on performance. So I want to have a look at those. And then I want to actually look at some models of motivation. I'm going to share with you some of the reputable models that are out there on motivation. And I do that because it may give you some perspective around how to get the best out of people. And I'll wrap up this session by giving you some very practical how-tos, how you can create that motivational environment that we talked about before. All right, so let's get underway. So what you can see on your screen here, and what's quite important, is let's first of all understand what we mean by a motivation. What does it mean? Again, there's a lot of nonsense that's written about motivation. Let's just understand what it means first. And there's really three dimensions to motivation. So you can see in the center there it says forces within, and that's a key word, within an individual that account for the level, direction and persistence of effort expended at work. Now, those words, within, so in other words, motivation comes from within. It's the person's choice about whether they become motivated. And there are three dimensions: the level of motivation, the direction of motivation, and the persistence of motivation. And around the outside here, I've actually given you some ideas of what that means. So, for example, the direction. This is people's choice when presented with a number of alternatives. So where do people actually put all their energies at work? If they put all their energies into talking about what they did on the weekend, then obviously that's not what you as a leader would want. But if they put all their energies into their core tasks and responsibilities, then that is a good start in the right direction. So their focus and direction is part of what motivation is. Secondly, how persistent are they? That is, how long will a person stick with the given action? So obviously if somebody starts a task and drops the ball after 5 minutes, then they have very little persistence. So we're looking for people that not only are well directed but are also persistent in what they do. Their energy levels are persistent. So we're looking for people who will continually stick out a task until it's done. So that's another dimension of motivation. And finally, the final dimension of motivation is level. This is the level of intensity or the effort that people put forth. So if people have got a clear idea what they're supposed to do, that is, they have a clear direction, and they're willing to persist at that, but they're doing it at a very low level of intensity, well, that in itself can be a problem. So intensity is important. We want people to be, not only do we want them focused, not only do we want them persistent, but we also want them to be intense in what they do. So I think why this definition is important is you might actually like to think about some of the people that work for you or with you, and you might like to think, well, if I classified that person as not motivated, which of those three dimensions is lacking? And you might say, well, all three, but in some cases it may well be one. And then I would strongly urge you, then you can have a conversation with that person about that dimension. So for example, if people are having issues around knowing what they need to do, so their focus is very poor, then obviously the conversation, instead of just saying you're not motivated, you can actually challenge people and say, well, I think we need to work together to help you get clear on the direction that you need to take in the job that you're doing. On the other hand, if the person gives up after just starting on a task, or gets waylaid on something else, or whatever, then it's a persistence problem. So we might want to talk to the person about giving them some encouragement around maintaining their persistence to see the job through. On the other hand, if it's a level of intensity, and that could manifest itself in the amount of time it takes people to do something, or the amount of work that people get done in a particular time frame, then we can talk about our standards in that area, and the fact that the standards that the other person is exhibiting isn't actually where you would want it to be. So let's be clear about what motivation is before we move on any further. So they're the three dimensions. So let's delve a little bit deeper now and actually have a look at some of the myths around motivation. And I want to share these with you because I think I want to dispel some of the concepts that we have around what motivation is and what it isn't. Now, one of the myths about motivation is that you can't motivate people. You can only provide the circumstances by which people become motivated. This is extremely important because I think a lot of leaders believe that they actually have the power to motivate people. You don't. I don't. The reality is, it is the other person who has that decision and that choice. Now, that became really important to me when I was managing, because when I managed a group of people, initially I just assumed that I could motivate people, and I found it very frustrating when I wasn't getting through to one or two people. And then it dawned on me that I don't actually have that responsibility. It is their responsibility to become motivated. My responsibility was to do what I could to create the environment whereby people become motivated. And you often hear people saying, oh, well, I read that book or I went to that seminar and that speaker didn't really motivate me. Well, the speaker wasn't meant to motivate you. The speaker was there to create an environment by which you may make the decision to be motivated. So this is critically important. So in other words, I guess what this means is that you're not going to always hit the mark all the time, because ultimately you don't have complete control over whether people are motivated. So you just got to kind of just accept that reality and move on to those that may choose to be motivated. So that's one myth. Now, another myth is that I often hear people say to me in an executive coaching program or whatever that so-and-so is not motivated. Well, you can't actually say that. We're all motivated, but we're not all motivated doing the same things. Just getting out of bed this morning is in itself a motivation. Not a particularly high level of motivation, I might say, but it's still a level of motivation. So the reality is that every single person on the planet has some degree of motivation, but not everybody actually is inspired. So, and some people just are never going to be inspired by work, but if you talk to them in the lunchroom or you find out what their interests are, it's actually quite amazing what people do in their private life. And you can think to yourself, well, why don't they put the same energy, why don't they put the same focus and persistence into their work that they do in their own hobbies or sports or whatever? So it's not actually reasonable to say that some people aren't motivated. Everyone is. It's just that they're not inspired. Now, if you doubt that, think about the closest body of water that you're near at the moment, if you're living on the coast, think of the surf. If you're living near a river, think of a river. And just imagine for a minute that the person that you think is the least motivated in your workplace, that you actually took them out to the beach or the river and you grabbed them by the scruff of the neck and you dunked them into the water and you held their head for as long as possible underwater. Well, we all know, we've all got a picture of what will happen. That person will fight like crazy to come to the surface. They have a motivation to survive. So even though they may not be motivated in the workplace, they're certainly motivated under those circumstances. So that's important, because the implications of that are that we need to find out what makes people tick. Everybody ticks. It's just a matter of finding out what it is. Now and that's the next point, is that one size does not fit all. So the reality is that what motivates one person will not motivate somebody else. And this is as wide as there is as many people. So, for example, some people are motivated by prestige. Some people are motivated by attention. Other people are motivated by affection. Other people are motivated by working in a harmonious environment. There is lots and lots of motivations. Now, I wish it was this simple, but you can't actually walk up to someone and say, tell me exactly what it is that you need to be motivated by, and I'll do it. Sometimes people can't even articulate what it is. But the reality is it's completely subjective. So what that means for you is that you need to spend time listening and observing the people that work for you, and think carefully about what buttons there are that you need to press. Because if you try and motivate people on the basis of what you're motivated by, you will not hit the mark on many occasions. For example, many leaders have a kind of a self-motivation. They like to be challenged, and they assume that the people that work for them like the same sorts of things, so they challenge other people and find that they get very disappointed when they don't meet the mark. So motivation is subjective. Intrinsic motivation, intrinsic meaning internal, is more powerful than extrinsic motivation. Now, extrinsic motivation is where we give people rewards and trinkets and recognition and money and all of these tangible kinds of things in order to get greater performance. Now, I'm not suggesting that they don't have a place, but the reality is that after a while people get used to these rewards and they don't have the same motivational qualities that they once had. So obviously what we're trying to do is to get people to feel intrinsically motivated. That's a far better way. So rewards are not always effective, and I'm going to pick up on that point a little bit later in the presentation. Now, here's a controversial one, but money is overestimated as a motivational force. Now, the world revolves around money. People talk about money a lot of times. You see it everywhere. So how could I possibly make this claim? Well, it can be made because, just think about it this way, very simply. If you paid everyone double, if you had the capacity to do that, do you expect to get double the productivity? You might expect it, but you might be deeply disappointed with the results. So if it was that money was such a great motivational force, then all it would really simply require is us paying more people, we're paying people, more than what they're earning, and that would increase motivational levels. And that doesn't work necessarily. Works for some people, of course, because motivation is subjective, but not all people. So now, does that mean that we can cut people's wages and still expect the same results? Absolutely not. There is a threshold of expectation around what people expect to earn, and going below that will be a demotivator. Hertzberg was the scholar who basically talked about money as a problem in terms of it being a demotivator when people aren't paid enough. But he claimed that when people were paid more than enough, it wasn't necessarily equating into productivity. So money is hugely overestimated. I'm not saying it's not important, don't get me wrong, but let's not just think that it is all about the money. Now, one of the principles that I think is very interesting about motivation is that if you boil it all down, people are really motivated by two powerful forces, pain and pleasure. And what I mean by that is that people will do all they can to avoid pain, and they'll do all they can to seek pleasure. Now, that's a very simple concept, and it's a very true concept. If you think about it, getting out of bed this morning could be either an exercise of avoiding pain or an exercise in seeking pleasure. If it was about avoiding pain, it would have been the terrible feeling that one would have when the boss was barking at us because we didn't turn up to work on time. It could be pleasurable in the sense that we couldn't wait for the challenges that we have at work, so it could be one or the other. The issue around that one is interesting that the concepts of pain and pleasure are different for different people. So obviously somebody that likes robbing banks has a different concept of pain and pleasure to what we might have. Their concept of pain might be that they don't feel that they're part of the peer group, or their concept of pleasure might be that they enjoy the adrenaline rush. Whatever it is, it's certainly not my idea of pain and pleasure, and probably nor yours. So pain and pleasure depends on, is in the eye of the beholder again. For example, you can have two people at traffic lights sitting there waiting, and they're both late for work. They're both in separate cars. The traffic light is red. One's cursing and swearing at the traffic lights. The other one's just sitting there calmly listening to music. Yet they're both late for the same meeting. Why? Well, one, of course, is linking enormous pain, and the other one is just probably thinking to themselves, well, there isn't much I can do about this, so I'm just going to relax and enjoy the pleasant music that's on the radio. So the same thing's happening to the same people, but they're reacting differently. All right, so those are some of the principles that often get in the way for us to understand what motivation is all about. Now, let's talk about the 10 qualities employees want in a job. Now, remember I said at the outset, this was a survey of 9,000 people across 20 plus industries, and it was a simple case of them identifying what it was that they wanted most of all from a job. Now, the results in some senses will surprise you. In other cases, it won't on reflection. But remember, when we collected, and I didn't do this Harvard, it was a Harvard survey, but when they collected these data, what they actually did is used a frequency analysis. So number one on the list was the one that was mentioned most frequently. And here it is. Can you guess what number one is? That's right. To work for efficient managers. That is the number one thing that people want in their job. So you can understand what that means, can't you? Working for an inefficient manager must be one of the most demotivating concepts out. So being a good leader and a good operator and a good boss means that you are well on your way to creating the motivational environment by which people will feel a sense of motivation. That was number one. Now, I didn't make this up. This is what employees are saying. What do you think number two was? This is probably not a surprise to some of you. Number two was that people wanted to be able to think for themselves. They didn't want to be micromanaged. They wanted to be able to make their own decisions. Now, I know some of you are thinking to yourself, well, I wish some of my people would think for themselves. I seem to have to spoon feed them all the time. And it may seem like that, but people do want to make their own decisions. They don't want to be micromanaged. And that was the number two quality. Number 3, quality. Now think about the implications of all this from the leadership point of view. If number 1, working for efficient managers, then it's probably a good idea to be efficient and effective, and that's obviously why you've entered into this program, to be even more efficient and effective than you currently are. To think for themselves means you've got to allow people to make their own judgments and decisions at the coalface. Number 3 was to see the end result of their work. Now, I did a job in a local government environment in Queensland, and I actually asked the indoor and the outdoor staff to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 their job satisfaction. So all they had to do was to go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 on where they would rate their current job satisfaction. And then, of course, what I did is aggregated all the results. And what I found very interesting is that the outdoor staff had a higher job satisfaction than the indoor staff by quite a margin. And the reason for that is fairly straightforward, that they can actually see the end result of their work. It's very tangible. So that road's been fixed, that road's been built, that bridge has been fixed, that bridge has been built, that building has been cleaned or renovated. So an outdoor staff person can actually see the end result of their work. So the implications for that for you as a leader is that you need to provide people with an understanding and appreciation of what the end result of the work is. And of course, in an office environment, it's not quite so tangible. It's usually a report or something of that nature. It's not very obvious what that's there for. People wanted to be assigned interesting work, so they want variety in their work. Now, that's not always possible, of course, and most work that we do is drudgery if we think about it. But the reality is there is opportunities where people can actually engage in some interesting tasks. So making work interesting is always a good thing, where possible, of course. Now, this won't surprise any of you. Being informed, people want to know 2 things. They want to know what's going to affect their job, and they'll also want to know what is going to affect the organisation which they are part of. Those 2 things are critically important, and of course, as we all know, we don't get informed anywhere near to the degree that we think we should be, and of course that's a demotivator. People want to be listened to, and I don't think we do anywhere near enough of that as leaders. We need to spend time, and that's why I've been banging on about having one-on-one meetings with your people and being a bit patient and actually listening to what it is that they want and need. If you do just that, you'll be doing a lot. People want to be respected, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, I'd like to be able to respect some people, but I really can't. You can respect them as human beings, fundamental human rights, in other words, and that's all we're talking about here. We're not talking about being best friends or going down the pub with them or whatever. We're really talking about just showing a basic human respect, and that's what people want and need. They're calling people by their name, looking at them when they're speaking to you, giving them 100% attention when they've got something to say, not interrupting them in meetings. All of these things are fundamental signs of respect or a lack of respect. Number 8, to be recognised for their efforts. People actually want you to actually say thank you or I appreciate the work you've done, and that's really important. So, you know, sometimes you can just do that in a process as such. So you can respect people at that level whenever that occurs. Number 9, to be challenged. People want to feel a sense of challenge in their work. They don't want to be stressed out to a point where they can't achieve things, but they do want to feel a sense of challenge in the work that they do. And number 10, they want to have opportunities to increase their skill development, and that becomes extremely important, that people want to feel as if they're growing and developing in their role. And again, you might find contradictions to that. But generally speaking, most people want to feel that. So there, in a nutshell, are the 10 particular qualities that employees want in their work. Some of it's interesting reading, isn't it? So I pose this question to you now is, if you have one person who's just not motivated, what do you do? You've got one person in your team that you've tried plan A, you've tried plan B, you've tried plan C, and you're at your wit's ends. What should you do? Well, this is what I suggest. Ask them. Ask them a question like this. Is there anything that I'm doing or not doing that can help you to be more engaged in the work that you're doing? Now, that's a good question, because why? It's showing respect. I mean, at the end of the day, you're willing to change your approach if it means that that person is actually going to be more engaged in the work they're doing. So that's a good place to start. It demonstrates to the person that you're serious about getting the best out of them. It demonstrates to them that you're willing to listen to their response. It demonstrates to them a sense of respect. It puts responsibility back on the individual. There's a lot of good things in a question like that. You won't always get the ideal answer, but it's a good place to actually start. So having a conversation with people can be a big start. All right, now what I want to do now is just share with you, I talked about job job tasks and non-job tasks before in the introduction. So let me just share that with you a little further, because I think there's some really useful insights in this for you as a leader. All right, so the work that people do can be divided into two dimensions. There's the job role that people do. Now, the job role is fairly straightforward. It's written on the job description. And the job role is explicit and it's expected, and essentially it's about the technical tasks and skills that the person is expected to perform in the job that they have. I don't want to deal with that necessarily at the moment, but I just want to share with you another dimension of performance that's often missing in the workplace. And that is this concept that I have mentioned before, which is the non-job role. So what in heaven's name is a non-job role? A non-job role normally isn't reflected in the job description, but has a huge bearing on performance. And what I've done in this model that I have developed is I have actually identified 4 areas that I believe are critically important to performance that are not directly related to a particular job, that everyone across all industries would be expected to play if they're perceived to be performing. So what are they? Let's have a look. One of those is a positive mental attitude and enthusiasm role. Now, I'm not expecting people to come to work bouncing off the walls with huge energy, high energy, but I don't expect people to come to work negative and undermining and blaming. To me, and I know that many of you in this broadcast have people like that. I just don't think that's negotiable. I think at the end of the day, people can think whatever they think, but if they're undermining your capacity to build up a morale in a team, then you need to confront them about that, because it's just not appropriate. It's not appropriate at all. Another role that's critically important is the team role. We expect people in the workplace to actually be a team player. We want people to work together harmoniously and effectively. We have to have people work together harmoniously and effectively, yet I've heard lots of people saying, you know, I do my job, I come to work, I get it done, whether I get on with anybody in my team is irrelevant, I get the work done. No, it is very relevant, because one person can completely destroy a team morale. Another role is a career role. Now, what I mean by a career role is I'm expecting people to continually grow and develop as a person in their work. if they've stopped developing as a person, and I don't care if they're 2 years from retirement or just starting out as a millennial, if they're not actually growing and developing day by day, task by task, project by project, then ultimately what will happen is that they will become redundant because the world's moving so fast. So I don't think that's negotiable. I'm expecting people to continually grow and develop, and I will help them do that, but I expect them to come to work with that mindset, and I don't think that's unreasonable. And the fourth area that I think is critically important is I'm expecting people to come to work thinking about ways and means of developing the workplace. All right, so I want people's ideas. I want people to think about how they can make the workplace more effective, more efficient. How can we do things faster? How can we do things easier? How can we do things safer? How can we do things more effectively? And it goes on. I want people to bring their ideas to work. So if you think about it, those 4 non-job roles are critically important. Can you imagine if your organisation, for example, had people filled in them who are exhibiting all 4 of these roles? What a difference it would make. It would be a phenomenal difference. Equally, can you imagine what it would be like if your organisation was filled with people who all had a negative attitude, weren't willing to work in teams, weren't willing to develop themselves as people and employees, and weren't willing to offer suggestions and ways to improve the environment? What sort of workplace that would be? That would be a serious problem. So there's another dimension or model you might like to think about. And I think my point about this is that you should be insisting on standards across these 4 non-job roles as much as you insist your standards across the job role. Okay, so let's talk about some of the motivational theories that are out there and how they might apply to work. And I don't want to make this too theoretical. I pride myself in being very practical, but I think some of these models are very practical. The first one's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'm sure you've heard about. Abraham Maslow was reputed to have drawn this pyramid hierarchy of needs on a napkin out at dinner, and it's never actually been empirically tested, but certainly it's got plenty of face validity. There are plenty of people running around talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think the reason for that is it's very easily understood and very logical. So at the bottom of the apex here you have survival needs, air, food and water, and hopefully, well, of course, all the people that you lead obviously have all that sorted. Otherwise, that would be a serious problem, because if people haven't got air, food and water, that's all they're interested in. They're not interested in anything else until they've got that. So a school teacher who happens to be dealing with a child that hasn't eaten breakfast, for example, is going to have problems with that person because clearly they haven't had nourishment, so they're not going to be interested no matter how good the lesson is. The next set of needs is security needs. People want to feel safe physically. So in other words, they want to feel safe. So if you're living in a war-torn country or a region of the world, all you're worried about is protecting yourself from being attacked. But there's also psychological attack as well. So bullying, harassment and so forth is another form of security. So obviously that's why we have legislation in place and policies and procedures around harassment in the workplace, which is critically important. The next, so those 2 are pretty much sorted, give or take the fact that people do get harassed at work and so forth. But at the end of the day, that's not where your energy necessarily needs to be in a modern society. It's the next 3. They need a sense of belonging. So once they feel safe and once they feel secure, they want to feel as if they belong to something. And that's why we have people joining organisations and clubs and so forth in society. People want to feel as if they belong to something. So do the people that work for you feel as if they belong? Now, you might say yes, but what about the subcontractors? What about the ones that come in once or twice a week? Do they feel they're part of the show? Do you spend extra time explaining to them how relevant and important it is and what their role is and how important it is to the team. Once they feel a sense of belonging, they want to feel a sense of prestige. They want to feel as if their opinion and their views are valued, and that becomes critically important. Now, the majority of people in your workplace, surprisingly, are in these two areas, and you may well be at the apex. The apex is the area where Maslow calls self-actualization. This is the area where people need to continually grow and develop and build their skill set up. They need to be challenged constantly. And if they're not challenged, they get bored. Okay, now if you're in that category, you may be making an assumption that everybody else that works with you is motivated by that. Well, no, not necessarily. Make sure people feel they belong. Make sure that they've been listened to. So the person that's the newest person in your team should be the one you turn to first and say, tell me, you've been here for 2 months. Tell me what we're doing well and what aren't we doing so well. I'd be interested to know. What a great question. And I'll tell you what, they'll probably have a great answer because they don't have blinkers on. They've only been there for a very short period of time. But not only that, they'll feel a sense of belonging because you've genuinely asked them their opinion. So that's Maslow, good old Maslow. He was actually quite embarrassed about how that particular model took off. Well, good luck to him. Another model, which is McGregors' model, talks about theory X and theory Y. And theory X and theory Y, if you look at some of the descriptors there in theory X and theory Y, basically McGregor was the first person to actually say, well, the assumptions that leaders have about human nature is really a critical driver in how they treat people, which is a pretty good assumption to make. So if any of you have worked for a Theory X manager, and hopefully you're not one, but if you've worked for Theory X manager, you will know that it's about as demotivating as it possibly can be. These are people that don't trust you. These are people that micromanage. These are people that believe that you're lazy unless you're pushed. These are people that underestimate your skill set. These are people that are extremely frustrating to work with. What, on the other hand, is very good to work with are people who are Theory Y, which is the opposite. These are people that believe that people want to work. These are people that believe that people want to succeed, that work is natural, that people will direct themselves given enough scope. So Theory Y managers, of course, have got a good head start because they are in a position where they have a good assumption about human nature. It is possible to fluctuate from an X and a Y, but we won't get into all that at this stage. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the carrot and the stick. A lot of people believe that the only motivational strategy that's appropriate is to either use a stick, which is punishment, or a carrot, which is incentive. But the research shows that carrot and stick is extremely effective when we're dealing with very simple, straightforward tasks. So if you're working with a team in a manufacturing environment or in an outdoor labouring environment, then the carrot and the stick is probably a start to creating a motivational environment. However, it doesn't work for knowledge workers. In fact, what the research shows, it can actually be demotivating rather than motivating. And if you get the chance, if you haven't already, read Daniel Pink's book, Drive, and he goes into this in great detail. So I know that the majority of you who are in this broadcast are actually working with knowledge workers, so therefore let me give you another option to running around using a carrot and a stick. So Daniel Pink's model basically says that there are 3 key things that you as a leader ought to be doing to create the motivational environment that will help people choose to be motivated. And it makes perfect sense when you think about it. One of those key things, and they aren't necessarily in any order, is autonomy. People want to think for themselves. If you think back to that survey that I showed you before, people, number 2 on the list was that people want to feel a sense of autonomy. They want to feel as if they've got freedom to make decisions and choices. And wherever possible, you should do that in your workplace. So if you've been accused of being a micromanager and someone who doesn't delegate, I can assure you this is not helping you. You need to give that away and trust people. Perhaps you might be a Theory X manager and that's why you're not delegating, and that's why you might not be, giving people the autonomy to make their own decisions because you believe they probably can't. Well, they can if they're given the opportunity to. Now, within reason, obviously, you don't want people going off doing whatever they want, but you define the parameters of where people should have the freedom and autonomy. So ask them, what do you think about this? How should we go about that? What are your ideas about tackling this task? So that kind of, give people an opportunity to share that with you. Now, another important part is that people, particularly knowledge workers, want to feel a sense of mastery. They want to get better and better. And I guess this goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. People in the knowledge worker environment want to feel a sense of mastery. They want to be able to accomplish their tasks effectively. So it means that you've got to sponsor their development. It means that you've got to show people how to do things. It means you've got to coach people. It means you've got to mentor people. Remember all of these concepts we talked about last time. Hopefully it's all starting to come together now, that if we don't actually see ourselves as a people developer, then we're missing out on the second key dimension of Pink's motivational model, which is mastery. So we should be doing everything we can to help other people be more effective. And finally, and one that's very sadly neglected, is giving people a sense of purpose. Now, what do I mean by that? People need to know the why of work. Dave and Wendy Ulrich wrote a great book called The Why of Work. And essentially what they were saying is that people need to understand the bigger picture. They need to understand why you're requiring a task to be done the way it's done. Now let me give you a very simple example. Let's say you're working in a manufacturing environment and you happen to be the supervisor on one of the shifts. It's the end of the shift, or at least 20 minutes before the end of the shift, and you ask one of your team members to sweep the production area. You've never asked them to do that before, but you ask them to do that. Now, it's not a particularly exciting job, and it's probably one that the team member's not going to relish, but if you just ask them to do that versus this, that you actually say to them, I'd like you to sweep the floor, so you're asking, you're still giving them, you're still letting them know what you want them to do, and then you say, can I explain to you why it's important? We've got a potentially new customer who is going to want to look over the production area tonight between shifts, and this person wants to is looking at moving their ordering system over to ours, and they want to order a significant amount of product. And what we're trying to do is to create the very best impression that we can, and a clean and tidy production area is one of those things. So would you mind please helping us to do this, because it's going to help us all in the end, and sweep the floor. That took a couple of minutes. I shouldn't imagine that the sweeper is going to be jumping up and down with glee, but at least he or she has got a better perspective of why you want them to do the job. So I think sometimes managers don't do this for two reasons. I think the first reason is that they often think that the other person actually knows what the purpose of the job is. Big mistake. Most people haven't got a clue, and you remember your perspective as a leader is far greater than the people that you lead. And remember, your boss's perspective is far greater than the view that you have. Your job is to give the people that you lead a greater understanding and perspective of what's required. So actually doing what I just did by explaining to the person in the production area to sweep the floor is very important. So for something as mundane as that requires some direction of purpose, then what's our excuse? Most things should be explained clearly to people. The other reason that managers don't, that's the first reason, the other reason managers don't explain purpose is they make an assumption that because they're self-motivated, that they just assume that other people are. Well, no, not necessarily. Some people need context. They need to understand why something has to be done the way it's done. So purpose is critically important. Okay, so let's wrap all this up, and if you've got questions, please start to type them in on the question box there, because what I'm going to do is respond to some of those questions shortly before we finish up on the top of the hour. But what I want to do now is bring all this down to very practical feedback for you and give you some things that you can take away and actually start to implement immediately after lunch. So here we go. And these aren't necessarily in any order, but one of the things that's really important is to clarify the task role. Now, we just talked a little bit about that. That's, why am I asking you to do what you're doing? People need to understand what's important and what the purpose of the task is. So spend a few minutes explaining those things. You'll be amazed at the difference that that'll make. Secondly, show people how they can contribute. Give people some context. Give them some opportunities to contribute in different ways. Give people variety in their work. Mix it up a bit wherever possible. It can add, a lot of flavour to people that want flavour and variety in their work. Try to match people's job with their motives. So it's not always possible to do, but I often think that if someone's got an aptitude or a strength in an area, then our job as leaders is to actually try and find out how we can utilise that strength and innate talent more effectively. So our job is to think, for example, if one of your people is extremely good at dealing with the public or customers, they just got the gift of the gab and they're just great at that sort of stuff, and yet they're locked away and they have no contact with customers or the public, then maybe you need to think, how can I better utilise their ability to do that? So trying to match people up with what they're good at is a good starting point. So let people know about the advances and the gains that have been made and the jobs that have been required. So give people progress reports. If there's good news, if a customer's got or a client has given you some really good positive feedback, then you make sure that you share that with everybody in the team. Because I don't think there's enough of this going on. I often believe that meetings should start with win for the week or one positive. You actually go around the table and ask people what's gone well for the week, because there's always something that's gone well, and that creates an upward spiral of motivation. Remove organisational roadblocks. Now, some roadblocks are just there and there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to accept that, and you have to let the other person know that there's nothing you can do. But wherever possible, try and remove roadblocks. That's part of your job. Your job is actually try and make life easier for the people that work with you to do their job. So what roadblocks are there? What systems are in place? What can you do about it? How can you get rid of these things? And it's very similar to this. Remove supervisory roadblocks. Supervisory roadblocks could be as simple as you thinking you're always right and never listening to other people. So, start to think about your own way of leading people, because you may well be a roadblock yourself and you don't realise it, of course, but you could well be. Try and recognise individual successes. Remember, that was one of the top 10 qualities that people wanted out of their work. So just thank people. Thanking people is a good start. Just say, thank you guys, I really appreciate the effort that you put into this. And mean it is a good start. And sometimes pull people up in private and let them know that you're very happy with what they're doing. Okay, moving right along. Encourage goal clarification, encourage personal clarification. Make sure people understand what's expected of them in the work that they're doing. Ask them, are they clear about what they're supposed to be doing? Is there any area where they're not so clear and that you can help them clarify? Provide feedback. You'll find that in all 6 of these modules, I'm actually banging on about feedback. Why? Because it's critically important. It can actually be a motivator. People need to know what they're doing well, and they need to know what they're not doing so well. Okay, come to the end now. Let's have a look. What's your homework? Okay, your homework, and it's not that difficult because you're going to be hopefully doing this anyway, is to try to use autonomy, mastery and purpose in your leadership decisions and conversations, and stick at it no matter what. So I want you to start leading using autonomy, mastery and purpose. And if you start doing that, you'll be quite surprised at the results you get. So let's just boil all that we've done down today to 3 key words. And I think if you do that, you'll find that you'll get great results. Most of the time, not all the time. Remember, it's their choice about whether they become motivated. You can just create the motivational environment. We know that those 3 things, in a lot of cases, will create that. Not always. That's important. Okay, I'm now going to turn to questions. We've got a couple of minutes before we finish up, and so if you haven't already, please type in any questions that you might have, which I can actually deal with. Here's a question here from someone that I'll read out, if I may. I have someone in my team that I've tried everything to motivate, but haven't been successful. What should you suggest? Okay, I think probably we've all come across people like that, and you know, sometimes it might just be that you just, you know, cut your losses and just expect a minimum acceptable standard performance, and you start working with other people in your team where you can have an impact. So we've all probably had people like that, and myself included. I think, though, the essence of your question is that you need to sit down with the person and have a good, solid conversation with them about the fact that you don't believe that they're meeting the mark on X, Y, and Z, whatever X, Y, and Z is, and talk to them about that. And it's like the question I had before, and ask them what you can do to actually assist them, or what you shouldn't be doing to assist them. In other words, put a bit of the responsibility back on the individual to actually demonstrate to you that they have, you know, they have the wherewithal to be motivated. But yeah, look, it's a difficult one. But look, I think the problem with that is that we spend all of our energies and times on that one person, when in actual fact, everyone else in the team would benefit greatly by the same amount of time. In other words, we're actually focusing in the wrong place. That person it just may not work with them. So just let it go and start concentrating on some of the other people in the team. Your team members will appreciate it more. And what that does is it puts a little bit of pressure on that person that's demotivated to start to question what they're doing there. So that would be the way I would probably deal with it. You know, there are probably other things that I'd suggest, and I'll probably suggest those in future sessions. Okay, that looks like it might be it for the time being. So thank you, but you realise, of course, that you can contact me via email, and I'm always interested in feedback. I'm always interested in your questions. Part of this process is for me to be your coach. So if you have issues that you would like to discuss with me, then please do so. And you can see on your screen there, we're up to number 4. We've covered, you know, 4 topics now. We've covered feedback, we've covered influence, we've covered team performance, and now we've talked about the individual and people. 2 more sessions, we're going to talk about understanding people and their personalities, and we're going to talk about meeting, facilitating effective meetings. And for Module 5, I'm going to send you out a diagnostic to do similar to what I did in Module 2, because that will set it up nicely, and I can give you some feedback on what that means for you in Module 5. So thank you, folks. I've enjoyed, again, working with you, and I wish you all the very best. So I want you now to go out there. Hopefully you've had lunch. If you haven't, do so, and then go out, and I want you to try the autonomy, mastery, and purpose concepts that we've covered today. So thank you, and all the very best. Goodbye.